My name is Nikki Buxton and I'm with the Belize Bird Rescue. Our mission is primarily for the rehabilitation and release of former captive parrots and to rehabilitate and release any orphaned, injured or imperiled avian wildlife in Belize. It means pretty much the buck stops with me. I'm primarily responsible for every bird that comes in. I do the intake checks and any medical assessment, decide whether or not the bird needs to go to the veterinary clinic or not. And then I work with them to address any of the issues that they come in with and move them through the rehabilitation program, guide our staff into the best way to get this bird back out into the wild. We initially started to work with the wild-caught parrots that were victims of the local pet trade, and that became our primary focus and remains our primary focus. But we do work with every single species, but the parrots are the most complicated and probably the ones with the biggest issue in Belize. The yellowhead parrot is actually special in many ways. It's endemic to Belize, which means that particular subspecies of parrot is only found here in Belize. We've only got about 1,200 of them left in the wild, whereas like 30 years ago, they used to be 70,000 to 90,000. So it's an incredible drop. And they're very highly sought after for the pet trade because of the way they talk and mimic human voices. So we focus a lot of our attention on the conservation of those, not just the rehabilitation of any that come through the pet trade, but preemptive rehabilitation of birds that would have perished in the wild otherwise. The rescue process, we actually rely very heavily on the organization TIDE, Toledo Institute for Development and Environment. They work out of Punta Gorda in the protected areas around the Toledo area, like Swayze Bladen Forests and Paynes Creek National Park. And those are the strongholds for the nesting sites for the yellow-headed parrot. And it's pine savanna. The guys are very used to working in the pine savanna. They understand the nesting strategies of the birds and they know their colonies as well. They're super great resources for long-term information. So they help us assess which chicks they think are not going to survive based on their experience. And then they will bring us into the field and between us all, we'll remove the chicks from the nest. So then we take them back to the Belize Bird Rescue and we're very careful about how we raise them. Obviously they have to be raised with optimum nutrition and as much hands-off as possible. The last thing we want to do is imprint them. We don't talk around them. We don't do any unnecessary activities around them. And once they are self-feeding, we put them into an aviary that we have in the forest and then we just literally give them a plate of food once a day and walk away. So they are by themselves, like all but 10 minutes of the day. And when they're around a year old, we can take them back to the reserve where we have a soft release enclosure. We put them into that enclosure and the rangers at Paynes Creek will observe them, make sure that the wild flocks are working with them and integrating them, and then they'll release them. Within 2 weeks, we tend to see them gone and within the wild flocks. We band them all so we can visually observe which ones are ours and which ones are the wild ones. It's very important when we release a bird back into the wild that it doesn't see humans as a friend or a source of food. So the hands-off approach helps to reinforce that behavior. The longer we leave them with members of their own species, the more obviously they're going to talk to them. And I'm going to use the word talk because parrots do have a language of their own. That's definitely been documented and proven. So they'll start to communicate with one another, build up their cohesive flock. so that when we do release them, they are going to go into the wild and they're going to seek out their own kind and not look for the humans for the food. The only ones that we have in sanctuary are parrots, and they are the ones that cannot be released because they're physically, they have disabilities, or they're mentally just not adjusting to being wild. And for the most part, we try and keep those in natural flocks, and we don't interact with them. We don't treat them as pets. They especially the compromised ones, the ones missing wings or eyes or legs or beaks or something, they all have flocks, they all have partners. Parrots are a very, very social species, so they need other parrots. Unless you're actually sitting with the bird and really educating them on what that language means and reinforcing that with a reward of some sort so that the bird understands that there's communication there, it's just mimicking. If you imagine that they're in a closed situation, they can't fly for whatever reason, they're in a cage or their wings are clipped, all they've got to do now is observe what's going on around them and mimic what they're hearing. So they'll pick up on emotions and they'll pick up on sounds, but it's really just parroting. We use that word, you know, they're just repeating what they're hearing in a replacement of any form of communication they would have with a flock. And it's not necessarily a good thing. Just because they are laughing, it could actually deep down be a stress reaction. It's just a sound that they make when they're stressed, knowing that they're prevented from flying and doing what their body is telling them naturally that they should be doing. The official stance goes with the government stance, which is that it's actually illegal to have them in captivity. It's illegal to touch or take or buy or sell or molest any species of wildlife of any description, or their parts, feathers, eggs, anything. So our official stance is definitely that. We do understand that parrots are kept in captivity throughout the world, so that there's an idea that it's an acceptable pet. But for us, it kind of encourages looking around the world and seeing these captive bred birds that are harvested from a sustainable source. It makes it acceptable for people to do what they're doing here from an unsustainable source with a bird that's still in its natural environment and has all the stresses of not being able to behave like a wild animal. And bottom line, they're all wild animals. We haven't domesticated them. We haven't selectively bred them for desirable traits. So they're still wild animals. So my stance will always be that they don't belong in cages, and I don't believe they make good pets. We did, actually. We were getting to the point where the government was selectively enforcing the law. Without putting too fine a point on it, you know how it works here. Sometimes if somebody has political contacts or friends, they can get away with stuff that other people couldn't. So to us, it was unfair. The law wasn't being enforced fairly and right across the board. And it wasn't helping what we were trying to achieve. So we worked with the Forest Department on making something, a structure that they could hold up in front of people and say, look, this is the law, this is what we're going to do. So we worked on minimum standards, we called it. So the bird had to be in a certain size cage with a certain number of perches, certain different types of food, shade, shelter, access to sun and rain. And as long as people were complying with that, as long as the bird was healthy, they'd had the bird for a while in captivity, and there was a good relationship between the owner and the bird. Then we realized that BBR, Belize Bird Rescue, would take a little bit longer to rehabilitate those birds, and maybe it was better just to compromise and leave those where they were and concentrate on enforcing the law with new birds entering the pet trade that we could rehabilitate very quickly. A lot of that depends on the kind of bird it is. What we ask you to do, we use WhatsApp a lot. We like the photographs at WhatsApp and the locations. It's a great way of telling us where the bird is in the exact situation, because a lot of times when people describe what's going on, it's not at all what's going on. So that helps us an awful lot. We ask that people either can stay and observe, especially if the bird can't move or is stuck or whatever, if they can just watch them. If they feel confident capturing and containing the bird in a box or a basket or something, then we would be happy for them to do that. That makes our job a lot easier. But we're very careful to point out that they all come with some kind of defense mechanism, be it the talons or the beak or sometimes even the wings. And they need to be super careful not to get themselves injured or to damage the bird capturing it. And then hopefully we can get there, pick him up, take him back to the rescue and fix whatever's going on and try and release. We haven't been taking in interns. COVID obviously shut that down, and we haven't restarted the internship or the volunteer program because we don't really have the staff to monitor what volunteers are doing. But I assess everything on a case-by-case basis. It depends how long somebody wants to come for and what level of internship that they're looking for. So by all means get in touch and we can discuss it. I think spreading the word of what we do, because the more birds that people identify as being in trouble that we can actually help, the better, because we can't help them if we don't know about them. So that's the first goal, is to make everybody aware that there is somebody that they can call who will respond. Do your part. When you see anything going on that you're not comfortable with, kids are curious, they can kind of do things with birds that we see as cruel, that they're just being curious or inquisitive, and then there's some that like to throw stones or slingshots and stuff like that. Speak up, be their voice, speak up for those animals. They don't know what's going on and they don't know how to communicate their issues, and try and speak to anybody doing something that they shouldn't be doing and explain to them what the role of that bird is and why it's important that we leave them to do their job in the wild. All the information for any kind of support is on the website. We consider support everything from obviously money donation to sending wish list items to even just sharing a Facebook post. Helps get the information out. You never know who you end up talking to that way, so that all helps too. If you feel like your bird would be better off in the wild, if you feel like Holly would prefer to be flying with his own species and making babies of his own, then please contact us and we will work with you on the rehabilitation of that bird to get him back where he belongs. Belize Bird Rescue believes that every wild creature deserves a chance of freedom, and release is our ultimate goal.